Who are the adversaries on the internet? Hackers, criminals, government? Let's introduce a different definition for security for the purpose of discussing these adversaries. That definition would be achieving an information processing goal without being stopped or compromised by a possible adversary. The adversaries are the same as they are in the physical world. Common criminals looking for a financial gain, industrial spies looking for a competitive advantage, hackers looking for secret knowledge, or military intelligence agencies looking for, well, military intelligence. People haven't changed. The internet is just a newer place for people to ply their trades. Humans tend to partition the world into good and bad. These would be honest parties versus attackers, red teams versus blue teams. You may hear security terms like red teams and blue teams, red meaning the attackers and blue the defenders. Good people follow specification, bad ones do not. In order to talk about security, we must consider the different types of people and cover all of the partitions to cover all of these different viewpoints. The different adversaries can range anywhere between curious individuals, friends and family, dishonest people, hackers, script kiddies, companies, organized crime syndicates, governments and security agencies, or military signal intelligence. Insiders are often the greatest threat to companies, at least. Often, not all types of attackers matter. This is evident if we consider, for example, who would you not want to read your email. You might want to, for example, distinguish between family and friends or outsiders. We can categorize the different attackers on the internet in several ways. They have different objectives, different levels of access, different resources, different expertise, and different toleration of risk. So the objectives for attackers vary. Some attempt to cause just damage, some want to get financial gain, or some want to procure information. What is important to understand is that the objectives of, let's say, an industrial spy are different from the objectives of an organized crime syndicate. The countermeasures that stop the former might not even face the latter. Understanding the objectives of likely attackers is the first step toward figuring out what countermeasures are going to be effective. Then, adversaries have also different levels of access. An insider has much more access than someone outside of the organization. Some adversaries are well funded, some operate on a shoestring. Some have considerable technical expertise, others have none. Different adversaries are willing to tolerate different levels of risk. Terrorists, for instance, are happy to die for a cause, but criminals might not. They might be willing to risk jail time, but probably would not want to sacrifice themselves to a higher calling. Then there are some adversaries that are very risk adverse. For instance, publicity seekers probably would not want to go to jail. Wealthy adversaries are probably the most flexible, as they can trade resources for other things. You could gain access by paying off an insider, or you could gain expertise by buying some technology or hiring experts. You could also trade money for risk by executing a more sophisticated and more expensive attack. The rational adversary, not that all adversaries are sane, but most are rational within their frame of reference, Anyway, the adversaries will choose an attack that gives them a good return on investment, considering the budget and resources at hand. When making this budget for attacks, you have to consider expertise, access, control, manpower, time, and risk. Some attacks require a lot of access but not much expertise. For example, a car bomb. Some attacks require a lot of expertise but no access. Take, for example, breaking an encryption algorithm. Each adversary is going to have a set of attacks that are affordable for them, and a set of attacks that isn't. And if the adversary is paying attention, they will choose an attack that minimizes their cost and maximizes their benefit. The word hacker has several definitions. It used to be a compliment, then it became an insult. Lately, people seem to like cracker for the bad guys and hacker for the good guys. There's also a distinction between black hat hackers, white hat hackers, or gray hat hackers for those who operate between the black and white. There are good hackers and bad hackers, just as there are good plumbers and bad plumbers. There are also good bad hackers and bad good hackers. Let's not get into that discussion. Something to understand about hackers, hacking is a craft. For instance, Galileo Galilei was a hacker. Marie Curie was a hacker too. Aristotle, on the other hand, wasn't. Aristotle had some theoretical proofs that women had fewer teeth than men. Had Aristotle been a hacker, he would have simply counted how many teeth his wife had in her mouth. A good hacker might have counted their wife's teeth without her knowing about it while she is asleep. And a bad hacker might remove some of those teeth just to prove a point. Real hackers have considerable expertise, often greater than that of the system's original designers. Unfortunately, the mass of what we call hackers are rather talentless. Sometimes they are simply script kiddies, uninformed but curious individuals who are able to search for ready-made hacking tools on the internet, but who have no other skills beyond using a search engine. Hackers look at a system from the outside as an attacker, not from the inside as a designer. They are able to look at a system as an organism or as a whole, and often they understand the attacks better than the people who designed the systems. Hackers have their own websites, newsgroups, hacker conventions, and they often trade attacks and automated tools among themselves. Unfortunately, much of what attackers do is illegal. Apart from those few hackers who work in a research environment to evaluate security of systems in a laboratory setting, who publish analysis of products and systems, apart from those few, the rest are usually criminals. Those who break into people's networks or deface web pages, crash computers, spread viruses, this sort of activity is seldom legal. Loan criminals are another type of attacker. One innovative criminal in New Jersey attached a fake night deposit box to a bank wall and took it away early in the morning. People would go deposit money to this fake deposit box, and the criminal simply just walked away with it in the morning. Some years ago, an ATM machine was stolen in South Africa from inside a police station, or actually police headquarters, in broad daylight. Loan criminals like these cause the bulk of computer-related crimes. Sometimes they are insiders who notice a flaw in a system and decide to exploit it. Other times they are criminals working outside of the system. Lone criminals often don't have much money, access, or expertise, and often they get caught because of stupid mistakes. Someone might be smart enough to install a fake ATM machine somewhere and collect account numbers and PIN codes, but if they brag about it in a bar and get themselves arrested before cleaning out all of those accounts, well, that's the sort of thing that I'm talking about. Loan criminals will target commerce systems because that's where the money is. The techniques from loaners may lack elegance, but they will steal money and they cost more to catch them and prosecute them. And there is a lot of them. A malicious insider is probably the worst attacker of them all. They are dangerous and insidious. They are already inside the system that they want to attack, so they can ignore any perimeter defenses around the system. They probably have a high level of access and could be considered trusted by the system that they are attacking. For example, think about a programmer writing malicious code into a payroll database program to give himself a raise every 6 months. Or maybe think, for example, a bank vault guard purposely missetting the time lock to the vault to give their burglar friends easier access. Insiders can be impossible to stop because they're the exact same people that you're forced to trust. The alternative question here is, how would you make sure that you only hire honest people? Insiders are not necessarily employees, they can be consultants or contractors too. Most computer security measures like firewalls, intrusion detection systems, and so on deal with an external attacker, but they are pretty much powerless against insiders. For these insiders, revenge, financial gain, or publicity may be the motivation behind it all. Businesses have their own sort of attackers, because business is war. Well, it's kind of like war. It's war that has referees, rules which establish what is legal and what isn't. Sometimes, if a business has enough money, they can petition the referees and get the rules changed. The line where investigative techniques stop being legal and start being illegal is where competitive intelligence stops and industrial espionage starts. For example, breaking into a competitor's office and stealing files is always illegal, but looking a competitor up in a news article database is always legal. Bribing a competitor's engineers is illegal, but hiring them is legal. Hiring your competitor's engineers and having them bring a copy of the competitor's source code is of course illegal. Pretending to want to hire the senior engineer so that you can interview them, then, well, that's legal, pretty sleazy, and pretty clever as well. Then, think of the press as a subspecies of the industrial spy, but with a different motivation. The press isn't interested in a competitive advantage over its targets. It's interested in a newsworthy story. Some reporters have said that they would not think twice about publishing national security secrets, because they believe that it's the public's right to know that comes first. In many countries, free press is viewed as criminal. In such countries, the press is usually not very well funded and generally more the victim of an attack than the attacker. Journalists have gone to jail, been tortured, or even been killed for daring to speak against a ruling government. That's not what I mean, by the way, when I say the press can be an attacker, although this is how governments, certain governments, see the journalists. In industrial countries with reasonable freedoms, the press can bring considerable resources to bear on attacking a particular system or target. The press can be very well funded, they can hire experts to gain access, and if they believe their motivations are true, they can also tolerate quite a high risk. Organized crime is a global business. Organized crime's core competencies haven't changed much in this century. They still do drugs, prostitution, loan sharking, extortion, fraud, gambling. They are able to use technology in two different ways. First, it's a new venue for crime. They use hacking tools to break into banks or steal money. They can steal cell phone IDs and to resell them. Identity theft is a growing area. The organized crime syndicates also use computers to assist in their core businesses. Illegal gambling is easier to run. Cell phones and tablets allow bookies to operate from anywhere. Money laundering is increasingly better business of computers and electronic funds transfer, money moving from one account to another, changing ownership of accounts, disguising the money's origins, moving it through countries to keep less detailed records. In terms of risk, organized crime is what you get when you combine lone criminals with a lot of money and organization. Organized crime can buy access or expertise and have a higher tolerance than lone criminals alone. Then on the other side of the law, there's the police. You can think of the police as kind of a national intelligence organization, except that they are less well funded, less technically savvy, and focused on crime fighting. Depending on how benevolent your country is and whether or not they hold democratic elections, crime fighting can cover a whole lot of things that are not normally associated with police work. In any case, the police have a reasonable amount of funding and expertise. They're pretty risk averse, no cop wants to die because of their beliefs, but since they have the law on their side, things that are risks to some groups can be less risky to the police. The primary goal is information gathering, with information that stands up in court being more useful than information that doesn't. But police aren't above breaking the law. The fundamental assumption is that we trust the individual or some government to respect our privacy and to only use their powers wisely. While this is true most of the time, abuses are regular and can be pretty devastating. Terrorists are an interesting group of attackers to investigate. Now, I should point out there is no attempt here to make any moral judgments. After all, one person's terrorist is another person's freedom fighter. Anyway, terrorist groups usually are motivated by geopolitics or even worse, ethno-religion. We talk about groups like Hezbollah, the Red Brigade, Shining Path, Tamil Tigers, IRA, ETA, and so on. The groups can also be motivated by moral and ethical beliefs. These groups are generally more concerned with causing harm than gathering information, so the techniques they run are more along the lines of denial of service or outright destruction. Bombings are a classic. Kidnappings also work well. There are actually very few terrorists. Their attacks are more acts of war than anything else. Unless there is a rich idealist funding to their actions, most terrorists operate on a shoestring budget. And most of them are pretty unskilled. The typical attacker is simply a laborer who has been told to carry a bag and walk into the middle of a busy market and push a button. Finally, we have the most formidable adversaries. These are the big boys, the national intelligence organizations like CIA, NSA, KGB, FSB, MI5, MI6, GCHQ, and so on. A major national intelligence organization is probably the most formidable adversary there is. They are extremely well funded since they are usually considered a branch of the military. They have the funding to buy a whole lot of research, equipment, expertise, and just plain old manpower. A national intelligence organization is usually very risk averse. They don't like to see their names on the front page of a newspaper, so generally they do not engage in very risky activities. Intelligence objectives include everything that you'd normally think about: military information, weapons designs, diplomatic information. The telephone system is probably a goldmine of intelligence information, and so is the internet.